Hi, this is a case study looking at a good teacher turning bad. The article we read is about a first grade experienced teacher, Mrs. Horton, who was once Teacher of the Year. And she last spring began having some negative behaviors started coming out. She was becoming short and argumentative with the staff. And rumor had it she was having trouble at home. Her teaching practice, work ethic, overall attitude has been on a steady decline since last spring. The parents now are filing complaints asking for their children to be removed from her classroom. They're saying she's verbally abusive to their children. She's refusing parent-teacher conferences, yelling at kids when they make mistakes. A parent-teacher conference that was held with it included Mrs. Wilson, the school administrator, with a parent, Mr. Stanford, turned ugly when Mrs. Horton lost her temper and began yelling at Mr. Stanford. And Mrs. Wilson abruptly ended the conference and stated she would immediately get back with him once she had a conversation with Mrs. Horton. So, looking at that, what are the steps that I would take? So, what do I know and what do I need to know is the first thing we need to look at. So, let's look at what's going on. So what I know is Mrs. Horton's an experienced teacher. She was once Teacher of the Year. She is now, parents are complaining about her behavior within the classroom. She's refusing parent-teacher conferences, and she has been very short with not just her students, but also with the staff of the building. What do I need to know? So what I would need to know before I got into this is how long has she been at the district? What are the district policies? What are the state policies? When you have a teacher bullying students, or accused of bullying students, I should say, what's the policies? Looking at her past evaluations, looking at student growth, what do those things show about her? Also, looking at what kind of communication has happened between the parents and Mrs. Horton. First of all, look at that. Look at her newsletters. Look at the emails back and forth to the parents. Look at her phone log. What's going on? What has she done proactively to help her students and show their successes, as well as what challenges she's having with them? And then also looking at the conversation that happened between Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Horton about the new reading program. They had a discussion, and it did not turn out positively. But what exactly happened? What was involved in that conversation, and what were the next steps that were needed to take place? The problem is the parents are requesting the removal of their children from Mrs. Horton's classroom due to her supposed bad behavior of their children. So, as administrator, if I were to come in and look at this, what would be my plan? So let's look at what would be my plan. So, my proposed plan of action is a 3-step part. So the first part is before I can really sit down and have a conference with Mrs. Horton, I need to get all my ducks in a row, if you will. I need to collect all the data and look at all the facts that I have. So for instance, I would need to contact all the parents that have complained within the building as well as the district. Get the facts. What exactly happened? What are the details of that occurred that their children are saying is occurring? What have they witnessed? Getting emails, the emails back and forth between Mrs. Horton and these parents to look at those. I would also administer a survey to the kiddos. I know that they're only in first grade, therefore it needs to be something pretty simple. Maybe not the tripod student survey, but something along the lines that gives the kids can let myself know what are their thoughts about school, what are their thoughts about the teacher, what are their thoughts about the other kids in their classroom. Just kind of a survey to get that. I would also make sure I discuss with the district the policies that are in place to make sure I'm not following this exact procedures that they have in place. And I would also conduct a survey with the entire staff to get a feel for the climate of the building. That's the first part. Then the next part would be sitting down and having a conversation with Mrs. Horton, talking with her, seeing what exactly is going on. Maybe she'll open up and talk to me about her home life situation or her thoughts and feelings about the classroom. Really looking at seeing if she will talk to me. Then talking with her, laying out all of the complaints and grievances against her and working out those. And then talking about a course of action. How are we going to resolve this? How are we going to ensure that there is no, that her behavior is positive and she's creating a safe, respectful environment in her classroom. And I would probably put her on a remedial plan to help guide us on the course, especially because there are several standards. If I look at the Colorado teacher quality standards, she's not complying with those. And so definitely she needs to be on a plan to help her reach her effectiveness that she once had. And the final step would be, once I've met with her and we've kind of laid out a plan, letting the district know this is the plan, these are the steps moving forward, talking with the parents, letting the parents know I will be involved more often in the classroom, observing her, making sure that I am included in all the emails that go back and forth between the parents, sitting in on the conferences that she has with the parents to discuss the situations that are going on. So just being more proactive in the success of this classroom specifically. Now, the resolution is she sticks to this plan, she changes her attitude, and we move on. But looking at that, let's look at the resolve the issues. How success for all students, what is best for all the kids. So when I look at this, when I sit down and I compare the Colorado standards, the teacher standards, one thing I stuck out to me immediately was there's several standards that she's not meeting right now, which will affect her evaluation at the end of the year. So talking with her about these standards. Standard 2 is specifically looking at the teacher establishes a safe, inclusive, respectful, and learning environment for all students. The first element, A, they call it, is fostering a predictable learning environment in a classroom where each student has a positive, nurturing relationship with a caring adult. Right there. If these are true, if she is verbally abusing these kids, if she is not being a positive role model for them, they're not going to learn. It's going to affect their learning. As well as element E of this same standard 2 talks about providing a proactive, clear, and constructive feedback to families. Well, if she's refusing to have parent-teacher conferences, then she's not communicating with these parents. So right there, we need to get that, and that's why we need to do a remedial plan. Standard 3 talks about the learning environment, and so I included that one. And then the other big standard that really stuck out that Mrs. Horton, struggling with is Standard 5, which it is demonstrating leadership. She began last spring being negative, arguing with her coworkers and stuff. That is not showing good leadership skills. It's also not contributing her knowledge and skills. Belittling another staff member is not. Contributing, the other parts of Standard 5 discuss advocating for the schools as well as high ethical standards. Belittling the kids, yelling at the parents, not upholding those ethical standards. Making sure I create a remedial plan that's effective immediately, putting her on this plan and getting going immediately. Perhaps encouraging her to get some outside counseling. If she's going through all this at home, it definitely affects your classroom. Increase observations within the classroom, and then making sure I'm providing not just professional development for her, but all of the staff. One thing I looked at is we have this new reading program. Have they been trained on it? What is the follow-up trainings that are occurring? It didn't look like Mrs. Wilson has done any professional developments over the course of her 4 years in in this role. So making sure we've got some professional developments going for all the staff. My reflection on this. First, when I read this, I just, you feel for those kids. Thinking about those kids and being in a negative learning environment is not healthy at all. Then I also felt horrible for Mrs. Horton. If the rumors are true, their husband left her and she's now dealing with raising 2 kids on her own. All of that personal stress that she's going through, then add on top that she used to be teacher of the year and now she's struggling and having all these parents' complaints, what she must be feeling on the inside. So that kind of led me to really want to help her. How can I help her find herself again? How can we find that teacher of the year again? And then always at the end of the day, constantly remember students are the number one priority. Their success is number one. And so while you feel for Mrs. Horton and you struggle and you want to help her find herself again, at the end of the day, it is my responsibility and job to make sure those students are in the best learning environment that they can be in. So it is imperative we get Mrs. Horton's behavior turned around and fixed, or next steps would be looking at what the school policy is for removing a teacher from a classroom. Some unsolved issues that I could see happening. Perhaps the parents don't accept the plan. So we put this plan into place, but they're still unhappy with Mrs. Horton still being their child's teacher. What happens next? The other issue that I could see is, what if Mrs. Horton refuses the plan? And so what's the next step after that? So really looking at those 2 components as an administrator, you're going to have to address those situations, which leads to the 5th category we had, which dealt with standard 2 of an administrator. So what that is instructional capacity. So what am I doing as an education leader to promote the academic success of all students and the personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity? So we broke this down into 3 components. The first component is promoting academic success. So Mrs. Horton's classroom, analyzing all the data, looking at her evaluations as well as the complaints about the parents, creating a survey for the students, letting them express how they're feeling, implementing professional development, not just for her but for everybody in the building, making sure she's sticking to this remedial plan we put her on, and then coaching her not only with positive behavior reinforcement in the classroom and her working on her positiveness, but also implementing this new reading program. So that's the first component. The next component we looked at is the well-being of all the students. So how can I do that in her classroom as well as the entire building? I need to be conducting frequent observations within not only her room, but everyone's room. Interacting with the students more, getting out there at the recess or the lunch duties and interacting before and after school with those kiddos, letting them know who I am and creating that positive school environment. Have all students complete a survey about their feelings on school, not just Mrs. Horton's classroom, but everyone. Of course, making sure I'm working closely with Mrs. Horton and reinforcing that positive behavior, which will help promote the well-being of all students in her classroom. And then handle parent complaints seriously and thoroughly, really letting the parents know I'm there for them and making sure we are all in compliance with everything. The third component is enhancing instructional capacity, and I looked at that not just with Mrs. Horton, but also all of my staff. So looking at Mrs. Wilson's past 4 years, did not state about any professional development for all the staff. So getting some professional development going on. Lead by example. So maintaining my positive openness, open door policy, being out in the classrooms, really talking to the kids, talking to the staff, analyzing effective teacher practices that they used to have in place, but somehow incorporating them now into the new reading program. Making sure that any teacher that's struggling has a remedial plan, and also be present.